Hey everybody, we're going through Brel Gate 6 hard mode now. This is a raid that a lot of people have looked forward to, especially because of the famous video, How Hard is Raiding in Lost Ark by Saint One. And now that we have it, we can actually experience it and clear it, and it's definitely no joke. But I wanted to take this video just to make some commentary about my run, maybe kind of like share some footage with all you other Arcana players out there who are currently doing Brel hard gate 6 and see if there's something that's helpful for you. And then just kind of like talk about either things that I did well or things that I didn't do so well. And then at the end, maybe give some opinions about the fight. So let's just roll the footage and kind of like watch along. The first thing that I would say about doing gate 6 hard is that uptime is very important. The fight is really long, and you really want to phase a fight because there are some very difficult patterns that can come up overlaying with mechanics like the blue meteors and stuff like that, where if you don't push at the right speed, it can get very, very difficult. You're going to see more moves, which risk your raid dying more. You're going to see more meteors, which risk the tiles messing up. And every time you mess up, it's very, very likely that it's a reset, right? Anybody who's been doing any Brel hard mode knows that some of these fights can be really punishing. If you have a single mistake or a single death, it can be the raid reset. So with that out of the way, let's talk about that uptime. Because the fight is really long as well, it kind of like puts the demand out there that you have high uptime, but you're also not actually getting hit by these normal attack patterns. So you're going to need to become very familiar with them, right? I'm not going to talk specifically about every single normal attack pattern that Brel does. I think there are other guides out there that will teach you the specific moves, but there might be some select few that I talk about. In general, just try to keep to the core fundamentals of Lost Ark raiding, watch what the boss is doing, evade appropriately, and then when you know and you have confidence, and you should be building this confidence to have uptime, you should be aggressively playing to your appropriate uptime windows. One thing to say is that this memory, the shapes mechanic is largely the same as normal mode. That's very nice. But really, the meat and potatoes of a fight come when we get into the blue meteors phases, right? The fact that the blue meteors happen in sequence means that a lot of complications can arise in terms of where you place your meteors, how you place your meteors, kind of like making sure that the whole raid knows when the blue meteors are happening. Some very useful things to do is collect your raid in the center of the map so everybody can see exactly when the blue meteor spawns. So if you're doing certain drops, right, certain patterns of drops, so if we say like, okay, these meteors are going at 11 o'clock, and 6 o'clock, that means the first and second meteor are going to 11 o'clock, and the third meteor that spawns is going to 6 o'clock, or something like that, right? That means that we can actually know who's the first, who's the second, and who's the third meteor, which is incredibly important for this fight. So, like I mentioned, pushing DPS is really important. Happens in normal mode, but I think it happens kind of naturally as opposed to intentionally more often than not. But if you're on eye level and you're doing Gate 6 Brel hard, you definitely want to make decisions like, hey, everybody, let's make sure that we're stacking our buffs appropriately, that we're playing aggressive in terms of uptime, and we're going to try to get through this tornado phase. And so in our group, we kind of like make sure that we push through this tornado phase so that we don't actually see the resulting vortex, that whirlwind, that whirlpool that spawns, and we just move into the meteors phase. This also gives us more time because the meteors phase is kind of going on a strict schedule. So the earlier that you can get to the meteor phase, the more likelihood you're going to be able to make it to the end of the fight without enraging. Okay, so this is pretty simple. We just go clockwise and we place the meteors down. As Arcana here, there's not much that you can do. Sometimes sorceresses go to the middle to build meter while the meteors spawn. But I think it's better to play safer for Arcana and just make sure you handle the mechanic appropriately. And then you're on to, now we're in the blue meteors phase. Now we're just trying to push. So I'm playing 3 Ruin right now. And honestly, I think 3 Ruin is pretty good for a raid of this circumstance, right? Depending on the moves, you can kind of like lose uptime. But 3 rune is pretty resilient, right? You have a lot of redundancy, you have multiple stacking skills, you have multiple opportunities to get into your crit damage, you have a lot of movement speed buffs, so especially if you're playing Raid Captain, it's much more forgiving if the fight does something crazy. So I really, really like 3 rune for this fight. And the damage output was pretty good, to be honest. It definitely was keeping up. So I would say that if you're concerned about things like uptime and the fragility of your rotation, say you're running like 4 rune evoke or something like that, I would say that that's probably going to be very challenging in this fight. And maybe challenging is a wrong word because that implies that there's some skill expression there. But I would say like there are probably many situations where regardless of your skill expression, it's just not optimal for the fight, right? Just not optimal is the way that I would put it. Whereas I think 3 rune is pretty okay. So we just did our first set of blue meteors. It went 11, it went 12, and we're continuing to try to keep uptime on the boss, right? Based on my movement, there's 2 priorities that I have in my head. When blue meteors are coming up, it's mega focused on making sure that the blue meteors happen correctly, even at the expense of my damage. And then outside of when the blue meteor is happening, it's maximizing my uptime and making sure I don't take chip damage from mechanics and moves, okay? So for example, right here, I'm going to push the moves, and we know where the blue lines are going to be happening, right? So I can push damage pretty safely. But if Belshazzar was doing a different move, I might kind of look first and kind of see where the move is going and then make my decision about what I'm going to be doing here, right? So I don't really want to get hit by the red hands and the blue meteors are coming out, so I'm backing away from the boss. Once I know that I'm not responsible for the blue meteors, I'm getting back on and doing uptime, while remembering that maybe certain tiles will explode. This is another easy way for you to die and mess up. Especially when the yellow meteor is coming down, make sure that you're not on the half of the map that the yellow meteor is blowing up. Let's keep watching. The yellow meteor goes north, so we need to be very scared of the north side of the map. And so we're going to be playing very safe towards the bottom half just to make sure that nobody feels the need to dodge into those top 3 tiles, because that's also something that can happen. Just keeping Brel away from the tiles that are dangerous is really, really nice. And then we're also thinking about when our next blue meteor placements are. Now, if I remember correctly, our DPS in this pool was enough that we almost phase it, but then the blue meteors happen, even though she's already past the health bar where she would phase. So that's also something to watch out for, right? I think depending on the DPS of your group, some of these phases can happen in different orders. And that'll be really, really important to kind of make sure that, again, everybody in the raid is aware of. Okay, so here's a 5-5, 7-7 meteors. Remember, keeping everybody within each other's range is really important so you know when these meteors are happening. And we should face her right about here. Really, I think a lot of raids kind of like have obstacles because it's really just grinding out the mechanics and kind of like getting under your hands just how to avoid Belshazzar's normal moves. And then at the same time, it's just coordinating your raid and making sure everybody knows how important it is to know what the plan is for blue meteors and know when blue meteors are happening. And unless those 2 things are squared away really, really solid, because you're living in this phase for the majority of the Gate 6 fight, right? It's almost just the entire Gate 6 fight is all about those 2 things, right? Knowing how to live the normal moves that Belshazzar does, and then paying attention to the blue meteors when it's happening. Unless you can do that incredibly consistently amongst all 8 members of your group, it's going to be very hard to consistently move into the second shapes, right? Second shapes memory mechanic, or even getting into X7 with the meteor counters. Without those 2 things, you're going to kind of like be in limbo for a very long time, which I think the majority of the groups kind of suffer this circumstance. So Shandi memory, largely the same. I mean, it's almost exactly the same. There's really nothing else to think about here. I don't think I really even noticed Brel's moves. But as a priority, you really want to keep as many people alive as possible, and you don't want extra meteors to land. So it's very, very important that you organize your scouting, that people are appropriately spread out, and you know exactly, right, when it spawns, you notice how fast that clone actually responds. So I'm going to rewind it because it's really important, right? A lot of people where they make the mistake if you're checking for your inside guys on what to counter, what to stagger. A lot of people, they don't rotate and see enough spots to call out for their people inside. And one of the causes of that is they stay too long. So if you'll notice, we're waiting for the next images to spawn here. And you'll notice that it happens pretty fast, right? I'm standing in the center of the tile, and basically immediately after the Brel clone spawns, and I'm standing right on top of it, right? Make sure you're exactly in the middle of the tile so you're enough to trigger the indication. You notice that it happens immediately. So if I'm looking for clones and I happen to not be on a tile where the Belshazzar image will spin, you know that you can move on pretty quickly, right? Because obviously that one happened very fast, right? So I ping it and I move on and I can check others. You see, as I'm in the center, I can basically, like, once I touch it, I can kind of like wait for like a split second, and then you can move on because you know that it's going to respond pretty quick. As long as you run exactly to the center of the tile. I like to actually touch the images to make sure, but that's something important to try to keep your party alive. So we do all that. We catch all the images. People come out, and we continue DPSing. So this is basically the same thing as the first half of the fight, really. Belshazzar has a few different moves, but the grander scheme of things is all the same, right? We want to try to keep our uptime up, don't die to the normal moves, and know what your plan is for the meteors. We're going to know what our plan is. Mercedes, so these things I respect a lot, right? Whenever the Mercedes, the yellow orbs spawn, you want to kind of make sure that you're well out of the way of it, because getting hit by it pushes you off and then you die. It's a really bad way to kind of like lose your life in a run. Here comes the meteors. You notice how we're kind of close to the center so we can actually see what's happening with the meteors. And we know the order of them, and so people go to the appropriate spots. I can't stress to you how important it is that you play in such a way that everybody knows what's going on. Because once you get into to the point where your raid is doing hero moves, right, where it's like, oh, I'm going to be late to the 11 tile, and so you should put the meteor in 11, and I'll put it here, and I'll put it there. That's when mistakes happen, okay? So if you clutch it out and you're successful in doing that, that's great. However, the fact that you got to that point is already, especially in a fight like Brel Gate 6, it's already kind of like your party is not experienced enough, right? Like you shouldn't be putting yourself in a situation where you need that kind of like that panic kind of like clutch up situation, okay? It's those situations where people start kind of like putting their meteors on 2 tiles because they're trying to move before the meteor drops, right? It just gets crazy. You start hitting the wrong tiles. So it's just important that you never get into that situation in the first place. Make sure everybody knows when the blue meteors are spawning. Make sure everybody knows where they're going. And make sure that you're just very organized and very clean at those specific moments. So next meteors are happening, and we're calling when these meteors are happening. Okay, I'm going 12, I'm going 1, I'm going 1, and then I'm going 3, right? For the last one. So we did 12, 1, 1, 3 here. Make it so that everybody knows exactly what's happening. And I'm hyper focused on making sure the blue meteors are done. Then now we're watching moves, and we're just hyper focused on uptime here. You avoid the Mercedes, keep doing damage. Had some good cards there, and we get the judgment back. The role of the Arcana in this fight, you're definitely, with the way our class is, you are the one that should be pushing your raid's damage, right? At least in terms of like consistent damage. You should always be having good uptime. You should be putting up good numbers, right? You leave it for your Igniter Sorks to coordinate with burst windows and stuff like that. But sometimes if the situation isn't good for the Igniter Sorks, or there's mechanics that are happening on them, they can't pull off their Igniter. However, your role as an Arcana in the raid should be that you're providing consistency. So we're going to, even if the Igniter Sorks can't go at the exact times that they want, the fight should still look relatively fast-paced because the Arcana should be pushing a lot of damage, alongside, of course, a lot of the other sustained damage classes out there. But it's definitely important for you to keep up your uptime, right? You can't kind of get lazy with it. I guess the way to think about it is like, not that Igniter Sorks are lazy, but like you can't just make the excuse that like, oh, it's not like an exact perfect window, so I'm not going to go. You can't do that. You need to be providing value for your raid as an Arcana in terms of outputting damage. You need to be keeping on the boss, cycling your cards, cycling your ruin skills. Calling out these eyes can be really nice too, especially if somebody is far away and putting a meteor down, something like that. So we lost one, but we're far enough into the fight that it kind of is not a big deal. And after we handle double yellows, again, this is all just normal attack patterns that we need to get used to, right? Double yellows, you need to follow center. So this is really important. The person who is holding, okay, in this situation, we lost another member because of this, right? The person who actually has the center of that blue circle, they need to be calling out where they're going early, okay? So basically, at this point, when we see this yellow up here, the person who has the center of the blue circle needs to be saying, I'm dodging upwards or I'm dodging left. Everybody kind of needs to know what's happening so that everybody stays in. But because that didn't happen, we had a member that kind of split off. You can see that happen there. And what that means is they didn't get the buff, and because it does a lot of damage, they basically get one shot and we lose a member. So it's just like situations like that where, like, you know, sometimes Brel does that stack move, does the blue circle, and then there aren't moves that like force you to have to run away like that. But you can't play the game just assuming that you're going to get good RNG all the time. So you need to be ready to do things like time stop. You need to be ready to call out where you're moving and how you're dodging, right? Brel is chock full of these situations where, like, sometimes you're going to do the move set and it's going to be completely fine, or sometimes she's going to do a move and then put a mechanic on top of you, or do another move on top of that that's going to make it very, very difficult. And you need to be ready for the worst case scenarios. Otherwise, you're going to be playing inconsistent, you're constantly going to be losing people, and it's going to be really frustrating. Okay, so we're moving really close to second shapes. I mean, I think it's mostly the same as in normal mode, right? But the thing that you have to think about that might change it a little bit is that obviously, depending on how fast you push the DPS, it's not going to be consistent whether the top 3 tiles are broken or the bottom 3 tiles are broken. But the thing that I would say about second memories that's the most important is that, number one, you really, 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 really need to pay attention to tiles 9 o'clock and 3 o'clock. So that's the leftmost and the rightmost tile, okay? 9 o'clock and 3 o'clock, pay attention to those tiles a lot and a lot and a lot. If you're not using Inanna, just make sure you're constantly looking above your character for where you need to run. Returning to the middle is always really, really important, but always just make sure you're looking at the 9 o'clock and 3 o'clock tile to make sure that none of them are the safe spot, or if they are, that you see that immediately and you go. The second thing that can mess you up is, depending on how you drop your meteors, one of the tiles can respawn early. Don't let that mess you up, right? Because you see this tile respawn, don't assume that the other 2 tiles are respawned as well, right? That can really, really mess you up. Play as if you have the set of tiles that you do, right? So I have the bottom half available to me. Even if that top left tile respawns, I'm going to play as if I only had the bottom half available, because you do not want to get caught on one of the empty tiles, especially if you're trying to dash through or use a skill to get through that empty space. As everybody should know in Lost Ark, when there are confined spaces and you're trying to use your movement skills, that's bad news bears, okay? You don't want to do that. Let's see how this memory phase plays out. Try to go to the safe spot, whatever. This is all the same. We see that it's triangle. And you see, actually, that top left tile has actually respawned, right? I think it is. I'm pretty sure it is. But depending on how fast or slow our DPS was, this could have happened in the middle of the phase. This top left tile could have respawned at that point. We just need to make sure that we're not getting tricked by that, right? You just need to know that it's just the top left tile and not anything else. Okay, so we look at 3 and 9. Both of them are unsafe. We look at 9 is safe, but we also know that 7 is safe. 070. Nice and easy with Inanna out there. No need to panic. Just look clearly, see which tiles are safe, and go to those tiles. So at this point, we're feeling pretty good. If you make it to this phase of the fight with 6 people up, you're probably feeling pretty good. We have 4 minutes on the clock, so 4 minutes, 10 seconds or so on the clock, so we're pretty comfortable right now. It's just about standing away from the cardinal tiles, so 12, 3, 6, 9. Do not want to be stuck on those tiles, because Brel is going to blow them up real soon. There it is. continuing to push uptime. Like I mentioned, you need to be aggressive, but you also need to kind of like look at the moves and know exactly what's happening. What are your uptime windows, okay? Now we know that there's double yellow, so we solve the double yellow, and immediately after, we're doing uptime here. Trying to push as much damage as we can. You need to keep strict to your Lost Ark fundamentals, right? You take your turns, you watch what the boss is doing, you take your uptime appropriately. Bet I use the 3 Ruin Rain. Now this is stagger mechanic. Just want to make sure that we do this mechanic appropriately. Use a lot of my ruin skills to get there. And we're nearly at the X7, which is kind of like the big new thing. There's a lot of opportunity to wipe when you get to the X7 mechanic for sure. And so you just need to kind of like watch out and play carefully. Okay, we avoid this move. Now we need a stack. And again, remember, whenever you get this, the person who is in the middle of the circle should really be deciding where they're going, right? We just need to get ready. If there's a bad move that's happening, we need to be ready to move. But luckily, Brel didn't do anything that crazy. One thing that I will say about this particular phase is that you really have to watch your feet, okay? There's going to be a lot of AoEs that spawn that will hit you from under you. And especially when you're countering the meteors, I personally would recommend that you don't DPS, and not only that you don't DPS, but you don't left click randomly, because you really don't want to hit any red meteors, okay? A lot of people, rightfully in this game, because it's kind of like a really useful thing, when they move, they try to stop themselves by left clicking. I really recommend that for this phase, you really focus on not, when I say left click, I mean using your attack. Some people have it on right click or whatever, right? Your left click attack, I would focus on changing your mindset and just using your right click to kind of move to where you need to be, because you really do not want to accidentally hit red meteors, okay? And you'll see me play in that way in this phase. So again, watching your feet, just a lot of random stuff. And once you see that glow happen, so we saw the glow happen on the bottom right, so we know that that's the double meteor spot, and we know that we need to go to our spot here. If you watch, right, now I'm just moving with my right click. As much as I can, I'm just using my right click, and I'm clicking close to my character so I know where I'm stopping. And at this phase, you can see me stepping away. I'm keeping a good distance to my meteor, because you don't want to get behind your meteor. If you get behind your meteor and it flashes that you need to counter, you need to then spacebar in front of it. So you want to kind of position how I'm positioning, right? You're like giving myself space in front of the meteor, and I'm just kind of like moving along with it. While that's happening, you're looking at these moves that are happening on screen, right? So I know that there are bars out there that can paralyze me. So I know that I have to kind of like come in and avoid these attacks a little bit, right? Because you don't want to get hit right when you need to counter. So we saw that meteor flash red. Let's just rewind a little bit so you can see what that meteor flash looks like and how much time you actually have. It's pretty generous, okay? So the meteor spawns. There's the flash, okay? Don't get too antsy and try to think that you need to do something right when it flashes. You have more than enough time to see it flash, see what you need to do, and then respond appropriately. No panicking. Don't panic when that happens. Now that the phase is done, we can go back to attacking, right? Notice again how I wasn't using any left clicks. I was waiting for the meteors to explode before I left click. But now that it's gone, we're back to DPSing. Watch your feet. Watch the mechanics. There's a lot of stuff that spawn. Play carefully, watch your feet some more. More things on the floor. More things on the floor. So this whole phase is just, you got to DPS, and then really make sure you're always watching your feet. Always watching your feet. More things spawn. There's the flash. We saw the flash top left, so we can be done with our DPS, and now we're just moving with our right click, okay? And you see, now there's a move on top of me, right? So this space that's directly in front of the meteor is not exactly great. So what do I have to do in this situation? Well, I have to squeeze in on that right side to make sure that I can still be in front of the meteor and also be in an angle to counter. Now, luckily for Arcana, we have a range counter, so it's not that bad for us. But if you were a melee class, like, this could be really stressful, right? You'll probably need to save your spacebar or something like that to be able to do this appropriately. Okay, so you see that these things explode, right? So like if you're a melee character, you would need to kind of like have that timing in your head of like, okay, I can wait for it to explode, and then after it explodes, then I go. But because I'm an Arcana, I can just counter there. So let's rewind it and look again at the timing of this stuff. You don't need to panic. You can see the meteor flash and see what you need to do. There's a flash, there's a counter, right? A lot of time. There's a lot of time, so you can kind of like handle things appropriately. So if we rewind this again, right, the order of operations, we see the star coming in, so you know where the meteor is going to spawn. We stay in front of it and follow it. While we're following it, we're looking at our feet. We notice that an AoE is coming in, and we see where we need to go. We need to go to the right. We go to the right. Now we look at the flash. Flash happens. Now we do the counter, and we move forward. The follow-up that people forget to do is you need to aim the laser afterwards. And again, aiming the laser with a left click might be really dangerous, but because we're the last meteor, right, there's nothing else that's happening. But you notice that I just start right-clicking towards Belshazzar just to make sure that my meteor hits. Okay, watch your feet some more. And we're doing more DPS. Just a follow-up. More DPS. And now the flashes happen, so we go to our meteor spots. And again, we see where the star is, and we stay in front of it. And now we saw the star, we're staying in front of it, and we're keeping that distance. And now we're going to watch for moves to see if something happens to us. Nothing's happening. Okay, we see that there's an AoE, so we need to focus on dodging this AoE, right? We walk up, we saw the blue flash, and we counter. Look at how much time we have. Look at how much time we have. You really don't want to be panicking, okay? Look at how much time. I want you to pay attention to the meteor now. The meteor spawns, the meteor flashes. I even wait a little bit, and then I hit the counter, okay? You have a lot of time, so just make sure you're playing everything appropriately. Now we know that all the meteors are gone, so we can actually use our left click to face the boss. We shoot the laser. Okay. As per usual, we should all know that the bar move, the thing that leaves the bars on the floor, is very big AoEs. Okay, same thing. We see the star, we get in front of it, look at our feet, red flash, we don't do anything, just walk away, let all of that explode, and then the lasers will shoot Belshazzar's shield and break it. There it is. And basically, that's the rest of the fight. At this stage, you need to collect at least one buff here. Oops. At this stage of the fight, you just need to collect one buff to survive this, and then you push Belshazzar to 0 health, and then that'll start her next mechanic. So die to yellow, die to yellow. And we pushed her. And at this phase, you can kind of like designate one person to grab 9 buffs. If there's somebody with big buffs, that's fine, but in general, just do a lot of DPS to this orb. You do that, should be over. There it is. That's the fight. So there we have it. That's the Belshazzar hard fight. And to be honest, if I were to give some opinions on Belshazzar hard, there's a few things that are happening on the Western client that I think kind of like contribute to this experience of playing Belshazzar hard, because I feel like the general consensus is that the fight is really extremely difficult. If I were to give you my opinion, I think Belshazzar is one of the worst Legion raids, if not the worst Legion raid the game has to offer. Now, I would also say that in terms of like having fun and like the progression of it and beating it for the first time, Belshazzar hard is probably the most cinematic and the most rewarding feeling, partially because it is very difficult, but also because of the nature of the boss, right? Belshazzar as a Legion commander or whatever. But the actual mechanics of the fight, I think, really, really bring it down. It's not so good. And I think in the West, you know, how it released in the West, obviously in Korea it released completely differently. But just for the West, the fact that we got Belshazzar normal and then some months in Belshazzar hard, right? Like, we are very much used to a faster pace of content release, and especially because we kind of know all the content that's heading towards us, we have this expectation that like the game should be fresh every few months. And so we had to do normal, and then we did that for what, 3 months, 4 months. I don't remember how many months. And then the next content update is nothing new. It's just more Brel, and not just more Brel, but more Brel with bad fight mechanics. I think Gate 5 and Gate 6, in my opinion, have just really badly designed fight mechanics, and it's really punishing. And we need to do it to get ancient gear so that we can move forward towards Arcana or whatever, right? It's just like all of this stuff doesn't feel very good. It doesn't feel good. Um, we waited a bunch of time just to get more Belshazzar. I definitely think that the state of the game that we're in right now, we really, to be honest, should be getting out of Belshazzar hard as fast as we can. AGS released a roadmap and then talked about what they were going to be doing. And I think it all kind of looks good, but in my opinion, like currently Belshazzar hard is like not the best state the game has been in terms of just like players feeling pressure in terms of doing raids and having to like do very difficult content. Gatekeeping is going to be really tough because the content is hard. People are having to select more and more specifically, and then also it just makes for drama, right? Like if your group can't do Gate 5 or Gate 6, then groups disband. You know, it's a very common thing in MMOs for raids to like break up friendships and stuff like that. It's not an easy thing to do, right? A raid group, like if you care about the game, raid groups can be very hard to put together. In the end, it's about connecting people, and I think Brel Hard is one of those that can push people to like be very frustrated. So the faster we can get out of Brel Hard, the better. But if you guys have any questions, or if you have any thoughts, or if you have any stories that you want to tell about your runs, let me know in the comments. Hopefully this was interesting at the very least. Belshazzar Hard Gate 6 was definitely a challenge, and it's not my favorite fight. So with that, I'm looking forward to the new content. I'm looking forward to Kangel. Slayer is going to be cool. I don't know if I'm going to make one, but let me know if you are. Okay, thanks guys.